I have a little bit of a presentation that I want to take you guys through. And this is a series of webinars that I'm doing one a month. And it has to do with the collaboration that we at Willingness to Pay have with John and Rob over at pricingsas.com. So if you don't know pricingsas.com, they are the brainchild of John Kotowski and Rob Litters. And then John started to look at pricing pages like several years ago, I think 3-4 years ago. And he then built, sort of out of curiosity and just because he's a product guy, a scraper, and have then been scraping around 3,000 pricing pages daily and is compiling the data. So what I'm going to go through today is actually a lot of that data. So they came out with a report earlier today, and I have helped them. And so we have spoken about how to structure the data, how to have a taxonomy on pricing models. And I have, through my consulting, built a taxonomy of pricing models that I think is solid. So I'm going to share that with you, and then we're going to show how that looks across the population of sort of public pricing pages all across the web. And so that's actually going to be a lot of fun. I think there were a lot of sort of, let's say, insights and intuitions in that data that sort of, was intuitive and we kind of knew, but now we have some hard numbers on it. So that's pretty awesome. So the structure is as follows. I'm going to talk for about 20 to 30 minutes, and then there's going to be an open Q&A. And by open, I mean like anything goes. So I prefer that your talk to be about pricing, but in reality, I'll probably have an opinion about anything. So that's how it goes. And but before we begin, I just want to point to, this is me, that's fine, to the community.pricingsas.com. So pricingsas.com, if you go there, there is a login that gets you to a community page. This is the Discord community. We used to have a community over at school, but we've now moved that because we want to, let's say, co-host the community together with the Pricing SaaS website, their newsletter, all of that content. I think that's a way sort of stronger platform. So if any one of you is still on the school community, that is now, yesterday's news. We really would appreciate if you sort of took the 2 minutes and just like went over to the community.pricingsas.com and just joined there. This is also where I will be posting all the follow-up materials from this webinar. So the recording, slides, all these things. I will sort of go there and answer questions. I will probably in the future have some fireside chats there, and also any sort of longer form concept in terms of guides, templates, video courses. I've done a bit of them in the past, will be posted over in the community. So the idea is that is the one-stop shop for SaaS pricing for everyone. And if you don't know, Pricing SaaS came out with a report earlier today, and I will be referencing some of that material in the presentation today, and then also sort of adding a little bit of my own magic. All right, I'm a consultant. I help SaaS companies with pricing, and of course, pricing models is a big part of that work. So a lot of pricing architecture, how do we price, and so forth. And I hear a lot of different sort of words being used around what a pricing model is. Like, we have a tiered pricing model, we have a usage-based pricing model, we have a value-based pricing model, we have a license model, and so forth. And I think for me, I just wanted, and I've always wanted to like clean up that language a little bit. So part of that is that some people mistake what is essentially packaging, like what you can buy. So a tiered model would be usually that, from how the pricing architecture actually works. I gave this quite a bit of thought, and I came up with these sort of 6 components of what a pricing model has to have. And I'll go through them a little bit, but today we're going to focus on the first 2, the pricing modality and the pricing metric. So the pricing modality is essentially how you charge, and the pricing metric is what you charge. I'll show you in a second. Then we also need a time period. So since SaaS is a subscription, it's a price per week, price per quarter, price per month, price per year, whatever. So there needs to be a time period. And then if we have a unit that we price by, we also need some granularity. So if we're doing price per user, then it is price per 1 user or per 5 users or per 10 users. So there's some sort of granularity, like a chunkiness of the number. We probably want a discount structure as well. So some form of what happens if I buy a lot of it. And then finally, of course, we need a number, a price point. So $10, $20, whatever it is, the actual price point is also a part of it. But these sort of 4 elements, while important, like time period, granularity, discount structure, and price point, are actually almost secondary to the 2 sort of like major components of a price model, which is the modality and the metric. So that's what I'm really going to spend some time on. And then we have an extra sort of a wild card, which is thresholds, that I'll touch upon and explain because it usually throws people up a lot. We wanted to cover that too. And it's also in the report over at Pricing SaaS. So here goes. So pricing modality. There are 4 kinds and only 4. So this is the how you charge, not what you charge, but how. So not users or API calls, but the how. And there are 4 kinds. One is just a flat fee. So Netflix, for example, has a flat fee. I go to Netflix, I buy the subscription. It's $12.99 or $15 or whatever it is today. And then I have access to the platform. It doesn't charge me per movie. It doesn't charge me for how much of the movie I watch or how fast I watch it or any of the other things. It is just a number for having the product. We see flat fees used sometimes with lower ACV, like Netflix, like lower annual contract value products, usually below a couple hundred, where you just get access to the thing, the solution, and then flat fees work really well. Usually they don't work well for higher contract values, which is also why we very rarely see them in B2B SaaS. So we see them a lot in B2C SaaS, but actually not a lot in B2B SaaS, with some exceptions. We can see flat fees in add-ons, for example, which is where they're used a lot, where you just have a number. So flat fees is one way of charging. The second way of charging is that you charge per something, but on a license. So that could be per user per month, which means that you have a right to use something for a time period. So the time period is part of this, and you pay that up front, right? The second version of that would be a usage-based model where you have not right to, but access to use something, and then you pay in arrears. So this would be the difference between having a seat where I have a right to a user and then having to pay for active users at the end of a period. So for example, I think Slack very famously said, hey, just load on all the users you had. We'll just measure which ones are active, and then we'll just charge you for those. But it's actually free for you to give logins to all of your employees. So that's what people did in the early days of SaaS, and then they just charge them per active user. Whereas a lot of other software just charges for the right to use. So if you want to create a user profile, you need to pay upfront. And of course, this also goes with any other kind of metric, API calls, store locations, whatever it is that your solution does. You can usually turn it into both a usage-based, where you count in a period and then charge at the end, or a license-based, where you have a right that you then pay for upfront. Credit systems, that's the 4th modality. And this is a little more technical. We'll also see a little bit later in the numbers that it is the one least used of the 4. It has gotten a lot of recent popularity because a lot of AI functionality is priced on a credit basis. But credits is essentially usage paid upfront. So this is where I say, okay, you get a certain amount of credits, 100 credits, for example, you pay that upfront, and then in the time period, you then expense some of them, you spend some of the credits, but the credits that you do not use, they roll over to the next time period. And this is what differentiates a credit model from a license-based model, is that the credits are not lost. If I don't use them, they simply transfer to the next time period. But I have to then buy another chunk or volume of credits whenever the time period renews, every month, every year, whatever it is. So I continually sort of subscribe to these things, which makes the cash flow more predictable for credit models compared to users models, but then the user or the customer has the ability to only pay for what they use. So the major components, what modality governs or why it's good or why it's bad in a pricing model, is that it determines the cash flow and the risk. The cash flow and the risk. So, for example, with a usage-based model, the vendor, that's you, the SaaS company, you take the risk of non-usage and you collect payment, the cash, at the end of the period. So if I have this sort of usage-based model, it's essentially me taking on the risk and asking for the cash later, which is why a lot of people say, hey, usage-based is really, let's say, customer-friendly because it's very low risk for the customer. So, but of course, I would also say that it's a very high risk for the vendor, right? The SaaS company has no way of knowing of whether customers actually will use the software, and they will only sort of pay for whatever they use. So if they don't use it, you don't get paid and so forth. License-based is the exact opposite. There you have the friction at the point of sale, like upfront at the first end of the time period, where customers say, okay, I want to use the product, so I pay you now. And then, so you get the cash up front, and then it is the customer's risk of whether they use it or not, right? Credit models actually do sort of, they split the two and they say you get the cash flow first, but the risk is now shared because the vendor ultimately takes the risk of that the customer doesn't use the product in churns, but the customer doesn't have the risk that they're not going to use the product because their credits roll over into the next period, so they will always get them back, right? So this is how the four different modalities are, let's say, different in mainly these two components, the cash flow and risk. Now, the pricing metric is whatever we charge per. So price per user, price per API call, price per active store, anything really, right? So you can have any one of these metrics, and then you can apply a license or user or credit system in order to govern it. So you can have a per user on a license, that's seats paid up front, per user on a usage, that's active user in a certain period. You can have credits on a per user saying, hey, you buy these credits, and then we count how many active users you have, and we roll it over. So this is essentially what makes it different. Any metric needs to be measurable, meaning that if you can't measure it, you can't bill it. It needs to be legal, of course. If you are not allowed to measure it, you're not allowed to use it, then also you can't bill it. Customers must understand it, and they must want to actually have more of it. That's at least a good thing. So, and that last point I think is important because metrics sit on a value chain. So in this example we have here, we have some kind of a sales solution that helps people sell. So for this kind of example, you say, hey, our software really helps you make sales. And then the customer would think, okay, that means that I have a sales team, and my sales team that gets leads, and then they work the lead, and then they close the sale. So that is the value chain of the value creation process that happens at the customer. If you are to choose a pricing metric, then whatever metric you choose is going to sit at a certain point in the value chain, either in the beginning, the middle, or the end, depending on what you count. So if you count number of sales reps, then you're counting the team members that are at the beginning of the value chain because, hey, they're an input. It's something I need to buy. It's a cost I have in order to get what I want, which is the closed sales. So nobody wants salespeople. People want closed sales, right? And then salespeople, they get some leads or they generate some leads and then they work the leads. So at the lead stage, you might have total leads. And then you might also say, hey, we're only going to count leads at a later stage, like a sales qualified stage or like commercial discussion stage, where we're saying, hey, we're only counting leads at this later stage in the pipeline. And then ultimately we might say, hey, we're pricing you per closed one sale, right? So this is the difference between what we might call outcome-based or value-based pricing. It really determines where in the value chain the pricing metric sits. Are you counting something that sits at the beginning of the value chain or something that sits at the end of the value chain, which is different from whether something is usage-based or whether something is license-based. So you can have sales reps on a usage-based model. That doesn't mean that it's value-based. It doesn't mean that it's outcome-based. It simply means that the risk and the cash flow, if it's a usage-based model, sits with the vendor, with the SaaS company, and not with the buyer or the customer. Whereas you could say, hey, we are pricing you based on the closed won sales that you have. So really, we have an outcome-based or value-based pricing because the pricing that we charge you by is very closely aligned with the value that you get out of the solution. And of course, if we charge that on a license-based, then we're really putting the risk and the cash flow on the customer, like they need to actually close the sales in order to get the outcome. And of course, if we're saying, hey, we're pricing you based on the closed sales, and we're doing it in a usage-based way where we also take on the risk and we only get the cash after you get the cash, then you have the perfect combination of those outcomes where people say, hey, why wouldn't I pay you? Because, you only get paid if I actually get paid, and your cash actually comes to me first before they come to you. So the combination of metric and modality is really what governs a lot of risk and what governs a lot of sort of cash flow profiles and value in sort of outcome-based or input-based pricing across pricing models. When we work with clients, it is really sort of one of these ideas where we try to assess how well their current model performs in a sales context, in a value communication context, and whether the customers of our client actually appreciate the pricing model and think that it is a fair and equitable way for whatever solution that they're buying, right? And this actually has a lot to do also with what kind of solution it is. Like some solutions are much, let's say, easier to explain and contextualize in terms of one pricing model versus another. Depends also a little bit on whether the software is horizontal or vertical. But this is really where the rubber meets the road. And you can almost always, if you have a really awesome product that users actually really like, but for whatever reason, they're not adopting it too much and it's hard to sell and all these things, you can very often just rework the pricing model to something that is more outcome-based and has a, let's say, more equitable modality. You can get customers to actually buy, and then you can really make a difference in terms of the sales velocity and growth of the company. The next part is what I call like the extra sort of optional part here. That is pricing thresholds. And before I sort of go through what a pricing threshold is, I just want to show you. So this is actually a screenshot from the Pricing SaaS report where we have Miro as an example. So Miro uses a per member pricing metric with a license modality, and they have no less than 11 thresholds, right? So we see here that the starter pack has $8 per month per member. So this is a license, and the metric is a member of what it is. But then when we see down into sort of almost like the feature list of both the free and the starter, we can see that in the free, the single workspace has 3 editable boards. And this is a threshold, right? And then we can see over in the starter, we have unlimited boards. And then we have Try Miro AI, 10 credits per month per team. And then, of course, I can get over in the starter package, I can create, edit, and synthesize board concept with Miro AI, and I get 25 credits per month per member, right? So that is per member and the other is per team. Okay, so what is going on here, right? And we also have talk tracks and number of spaces and all these things. So Miro has 11 of these thresholds. So a threshold is any unit of volume in a given package or plan. So this is something that sits inside of the packaging that is somehow limited, right? So we had 3 editable boards as an example. And this can come in 2 distinct types with different dynamics. So you can have a soft threshold. In the Miro example, these are the AI credits, right? So it's like, hey, you'd get 10 credits per month, but you can probably buy more. Like that's the idea. So that's why it's soft. It's just a paywall where we actually encourage you to go above the 10 credits. It just has a price. So a soft threshold essentially is a pricing metric. There's a modality as well, but there is some sort of included volume. So we're saying, hey, a soft threshold is just like we're giving you a number of this metric in the package or in the tier, the product that you have. But if you want more, then you need to pay. And this is in contrast to a hard threshold, which is enforced. So you can't just pay to get more of it. So in this example, it would be the editable boards, because the only way in which I can get more editable boards in Miro is by upgrading. So it's actually changing products from free to starter. So we are often using these hard thresholds to drive adoption across a packaging structure, so up to a higher tier or into an add-on or some form of that. But we actually do not allow, with a hard threshold, any additional volume inside of the existing product. If we allow for additional volume, just to pay to have more volume, then it is a soft threshold. And then essentially it's just a pricing metric that is just hidden, stuffed into the packaging. The idea here is to have this taxonomy or understanding of what's going on with different sort of what actually constitutes a pricing model. So if you have the modality and you have the metric and you understand what these thresholds are, whether they're just like hard or just trying to drive you up packaging, or if they're just hidden pricing models inside of the product, that can be a comprehensive way of explaining different pricing models. I think it's solid. We have used it to explain hundreds of different pricing models without ever having to like come up with exceptions. So it's actually, the taxonomy is pretty strong as we find. I want to add another comment on threshold, and that is that I actually don't like thresholds that much. So soft thresholds, that can be fine, meaning that soft thresholds usually just allow you to buy things. It can have a lot of complexity from a pricing perspective. You'd really have to sort of choose how much complexity you add to the model, but overall that's okay. Too many hard thresholds create friction with the customer in the following way. So imagine that you have two hard thresholds. So let's say number of editable boards with Miro and 5 talk tracks. So that's what we have here. So what usually happens is that either these two things are correlated or they're not correlated. So you say, hey, is it so with most customers that we hit 3 editable boards and 5 talk tracks at the same time, or totally independent of each other, right? And my argument is that if you always hit them at the same time, so if the different sort of metrics that we're measuring here are very correlated, then why would you have more than one of them? Like if they're correlated, you can just do boards or talk tracks. You don't need to have 2 of them, right? So then they're just like extra like fat on the model, and you don't only actually just need 1. But if they're not correlated, if it's so that, hey, some people hit like editable boards, but they're actually still at 1 talk track, or vice versa, someone needs a lot of talk tracks, but not a lot of editable boards, then what happens is that the customer hits that threshold, and then they say, hey, okay, so to get more, I need to upgrade, but I don't feel that I'm using the entire product yet. So it feels unfair that I have to upgrade just because I hit this one thing, while I'm actually not even using all of the product on this other thing. And this actually gets really a lot worse if you have a lot of these hard thresholds. So I worked with a headless CMS system that had no less than 14 of these hard thresholds. And every customer sort of had hit one of the other threshold, and then they were always stuck. And nobody really wanted to upgrade until they had hit most of the hard thresholds. So there is a psychological barrier where customers feel unfairly treated or unfairly priced if they have to upgrade just because they are like out of bounds on just one of these. They want to sort of feel that they fill out and use all of the product before they upgrade. So I usually say, hey, thresholds are fine, but limit them just to just the one that really matters. And then you can solve the rest with just having a really good pricing metric with a good modality, and that usually takes care of the monetization for you and will create a lot more adoption than if you try to nickel and dime customers with having a ton of thresholds. Because usually, at least in most of the projects I work with, having a lot of thresholds is a symptom that the team that's doing the pricing doesn't really know what actually creates the value. And there's this sense that, oh, we're leaving a lot of value on the table. And if customers are using a lot of the product over here, and a lot of the product over here, or a lot of the product over there, then really we should try and monetize it. So we're creating all these barriers so that if customers use more or less than this or the other volume, then they need to pay. And in reality, you're creating this very ungenerous environment where customers don't adopt, and also very rarely they actually don't pay you that much more. So I have had a lot of very transformative pricing projects where we just took away a lot of the thresholds. And we just created a relatively simple, straightforward metric modality combo that just priced well and governed risk and cash flow well. And then we saw really the product take off quite a bit. How are these used? How does it actually look out there in the field? So this is all pricing SaaS and their scraping tool in their database and how they have compiled it. So the first thing is, how many of license usage, credits, and flat fees are there actually there? And if we take a look at it, we can see that license models still are the most ubiquitous model. So most of the models we see out there are licenses in that you get a right to use, you pay it up front, and that's how it goes. We have a lot of usage models as well. So that has become more and more, let's say, the norm, especially because you have billing systems that can actually govern this. You figure out how to send invoices. So a lot of this is actually also the underlying sort of supporting mechanism in tech stack and in finance to actually execute on a usage-based model. We've seen a lot of these tools come out in the last 5 years. So I think that's like definitely a part of it. And then we see credits like creeping up, flat fees creeping up. I think we're going to see a lot more credit systems in the next couple of years, especially because of a lot of the AI products and also functionality is being run on credits. So I think we're going to see this. I don't think it overtakes usage, but I think it has a really, I think maybe on a revenue basis, it's going to overtake usage, but maybe not on a like how many pricing models actually are out there. But I think some of the most successful models we have are going to be in credits, and I think a lot of revenue is going to run through them. And they're also really, really good at handling very complex models with a lot of different variety inside. If we take a look at the combinations, like where we say, hey, we're using license and usage or usage and credit, we can see that the combo of license and usage is very common compared to the other combined pricing models. We can see that users and credit and license this is around 3%. So this is sort of where you have like a few companies doing it, and then you have about 1% that is doing all three, where you have a lot of different complexity across the price. But licensing usage, where you have something like, hey, this is what it costs to use the software, to have access and rights of use. And then we have some elements where if you price on storage or API calls, or there are some infrastructure metrics or other things, we're going to price you based on how much you use it. And that can be also a really good way to both sort of get some cash up front, but also cover your costs in some of these models. If we look at it on category, we see that something like project management, Asana, Monday.com, Trello, these things, they are heavily based on licenses. And then if we go sort of down and see sort of who is sort of, let's say, the least based on licenses, we have a lot of the different sort of infrastructure related and horizontal related DevOps, data analytics, machine learning, especially the ones where you have a lot of different cloud costs and infrastructure costs. They are usually based on usage or credit models and so forth. But when you're at CRM systems, workforce management, and project management, that's where you have the license. And this was what I mentioned at the beginning, where I said, hey, there's definitely some intuitions that I think have been proven right with this analysis that the pricing SaaS did on the marketplace. So I think this is just really interesting to take a look at. Does this mean that this is a recommendation and this is, if you're a project management tool, you should have a license? Not necessarily. I think that entirely depends on your particular product or solution's take on that category. So it isn't necessarily a recommendation, but at least now you can see how other people are doing it. If we do the usage modality, you can see that it's almost inverted. So project manager now only sits at 3%, where cloud and DevOps have 77%. So it's almost inverted on category, who uses what, for the exact same reasons as with the license modality. Finally, we can see credits, which is sort of interestingly actually with the CRM system. So if you take CRM systems, we go two up here. They're the license model, but actually they're also some of the leaders in the credit modality. So cloud and DevOps is leading it. We have a lot of these sort of infrastructure related plays where you can see this. And then also in CRM systems where you essentially have rights to, for example, do some marketing automations and so forth. And that runs there. In the pricing SaaS report, you see a lot of different examples. They have example pages for each of them where they actually link to the pricing pages of all the actual companies, where you can see how it is actually sort of done on their page. So definitely go and check that out. Okay, that was the talk. So Chris asks, would modality be a counter to the term monetization? Not really. I think the pricing model overall is how you monetize. So actually, interestingly, I have found that the biggest sort of like ability of a pricing model to really monetize the value has something to do with a specific aspect of the pricing metric, which is density. So I usually score a pricing metric on a few parameters. Actually, I think I might have it open over here because I thought this might come up. So I'll try and sort of open this up. This is just a template that I use for some of my, so whenever we're evaluating how to structure a pricing model in the consulting projects we have. So we just like create a different sort of like a list of different sort of potential metrics that we have. So it could be, this is a little bit like a seafood concept. We have salmon, monthly active salmon, feeding kilos. I'm actually doing a seafood project right now where we do tons of output on aqua farming. And then we say, what's the modality? That might actually be like a license. And then we ask a series of questions. Do customers understand it? Can we define what this is? Can we measure it? In which case, if that's 3 yeses, then we have like it's operationally viable. Then we ask, do we have demand for it? That's essentially the question of where in the value chain it sits. Then we can ask if we have a high expectation to pay. It's a technical term. So the easier term is just fairness. Do customers think it's a fair rate to price? And finally, we have density. So density would be, let's say you have a user for a different system. And then you might say, hey, we have a type of user that is a high-level admin user that is using a piece of software. Let's say I have a project right now we're doing in cybersecurity where we have like the head of cybersecurity and we have the cybersecurity specialists inside of an organization. And then let's say below that in the hierarchy of this product, we have all the white-collar employees that have access to computers. And then maybe below that, we have all the blue-collar employees that don't have access to computers. They just have access to machinery. And then for a product like that, we might say, hey, if we just price per employee in this setup, we have a really low density, meaning that the cybersecurity professional and the blue-collar employee have very, very different value in this particular instance. So if we try to run that as a pricing metric, the customer will say, well, I know I have these really high value users that are really very relevant for the solution you have, but I also have a ton of these very low value users relative to the solutions you have. So I really would like to only pay for the low value users. So what happens is that SaaS vendors tend to look at the average value of the metric they have, whereas SaaS customers tend to look at the median or low end of the value inside of the metric they have. So if you're, let's say, pricing per sale might be a more sort of quantifiable example, and some sales are worth $1 million and other sales are worth $10, then even though the value on average might be 100K, the customer might say, hey, yeah, but if you charge like based on 100K, I'm losing money on all the $10 sales. So I actually want the pricing to be anchored to the $10 sale because I don't want to feel that I'm losing money on some of the things that you charge me per. So density is the clearest correlation I have found in this architecture around what really sort of gets at monetization potential. Because if you have perfect density, Stripe is a good example. So Stripe charges per transaction, not necessarily a lot of density, but they also charge you a percentage of the dollar value of the transaction. And $1 is perfectly worth as much as another dollar. So dollar value has perfect density in a monetary system. So when they charge you 2.9% of the processed payment, they have perfect density. And that means that they can monetize the value extremely well in what they do. So they can charge you 3% of the gross merchant value, which is, if they just charge per transaction, then that monetization potential would be way less. So that's what I sort of, how I think about monetization across these things. Ray asks if I can provide another example of a credit pricing model. Yeah. So I think the most sort of ordinary example that most people know is Audible. So audible.com, where I buy audiobooks or I buy e-reader books. Basically, it's a B2C model. I go in, I have a subscription every month. I get 5 credits, 10 credits. I go in, I can exchange a credit for a piece of content like an audiobook, and then it's spent. And then when I run out of credits, I can buy more, or I can wait until like the next time period where like next month, I'll get more credits into my account. And that's basically how it works. And you can do that I have done that with open source partnership models for CMS systems. I have done it for infrastructure related DevOps a lot, like these kinds of things. I have done it for machine translation for a ton of AI products. I've used AI credits. It's because it feeds adoption quite well and also handles a risk quite well in terms of usage. So I've done that. But Audible is the most common example that you have anywhere. Can you explain flat again with an example? Is the question by most? Yeah. So like a flat fee is just, you get access to whatever the solution is for as much of whatever the solution is, and there's just a number. And that number is the same for every customer. So Netflix was a good example. It costs you whatever, $10 a month, $20 a month, whatever the price is, to access Netflix. And that's it. It's not pricing you per anything. Like the per essentially is you as a customer. So it is a price per you. So, which is always one, right? So that just means the price is never arrived at by multiplying by something else. So it's not, Blockbuster is a user-based model. I pay for every movie I rent, right? Or buy. And then that's how that goes. But Netflix, flat fee, I just get everything. Annie Ruth says, credit feels like tokens at a game arcade. Yeah, like exactly. Credit model. The big friction point is always, I don't want to play game A anymore. I wish these leftover tokens would work on games B, C, D as well. Do you know of vendors that have large, multifaceted SaaS ecosystems where they've trialed a universal credits approach, where customers can pay for credits to access any software on offer by the vendor, not just the one use case? I've actually just invested in that company, more or less. It's called Pixel Pi, Pai, which does that exactly thing for Web3 games. So yeah, check that out. For others, it would be Audible. I guess it's sort of like you have a marketplace where essentially everybody else comes together with their content, like the audiobooks and so forth. And Audible basically provides access to all of that through a credit system that then handles the complexity. It is actually a really good, I don't know how they work. So I think Coursera and Udemy and some of these like content platforms have credit-ish models where they like you can access a lot of different offerings from like sub providers. So I think that works in similar ways. You might say that anytime I have some sort of an account where I pay in and I then get to spend on something else, it works. I've actually used that in groceries. So I had a grocery vendor that happened to also have a banking license. And we actually said, hey, if you prepay like every month, like $100 onto this account, we'll give you like 105 or 110 worth of grocery spend. And then also we'll give you access to like special deals. And that actually made a lot of people just upload their entire grocery budget to the grocer. And it also increased basket size quite a bit. And it worked wonders in terms of customer retention. So it's like you can really use credit models in a lot of different spaces. There is a lot of different sort of, let's say, technicalities around when you're a bank. So you're a bank if the credits can be paid back out in cash. So generally you don't want that. And then also you have some revenue recognition issues. So credits have to rot or expire at some point if you don't want to have this unlimited liability on your balance sheet where you always own credit somewhere. So it's a little bit like points on a loyalty card. If they don't expire, it can be detrimental to your balance sheet. Okay, Jared asks, on thresholds, do you see that customer behavior is to stay under soft thresholds to limit cost? Depends on the case, right? So I would say that sometimes it's just so naturally baked into the product that you just choose more of it. So I've used that, for example, last year I built a model on AI machine translation where we had a software where we said, hey, you get a bunch of these credits, they're prepaid, you just use them. Whenever you hit this limit, you have to buy more. And that was essentially how we chose to sell that product. And that worked really well. So it really depends on what the product actually does and how the, let's say, PLG motion, like how the usage interface presents that purchase to you, I would say. And then Jared asks further, on variable models usage credits, do you see, especially in B2B space, that finance teams frown on variability due to the desire to have stable budgeting? For sure. Also on the customer side, right? So I would say that credit models actually take away a lot of that variability, right? So because it takes away the cash flow variability, it only, like this gets sort of finance technical, it only produces some variability on the earnings, right? So you'll have to sell the credits, you get the cash, and then the credits go on the balance sheet as unearned revenue. And then whenever the credits are actually spent by the customer, you can then book it as revenue, right? And then, but if you say that, hey, the credits only expire after 2 years, and your finance team will know if I say they're used on a FIFO basis, like first in, first out, so you always use the oldest credit first, they usually chill out and accept it, right? So that's what we have here. And I can see when I start to talk about finance stuff, the number of people in the call start to drop dramatically. So I'll move on, Jared. Steve asks here, I'm curious what your thoughts are on the role of feature packaging in a credit model. If a key objective is to encourage experimentation, then I personally don't like the idea of feature packaging in a credit model because it puts certain features behind a paywall that I want users to explore. I'd rather just tie the features that matter to the credits. Thoughts? Yeah, I think you're mixing two things up, right? So if you have, let's say, really powerful, I'm actually doing exactly this thing in a pricing model for a US customer right now, where we're saying, hey, these advanced team type features where we have some collaborative functionality, that's for a different tier. But on the base tier, you get more like single user type functionality, but the usage essentially is governed by credits in both instances. So I think if you have a really clear differentiation between what job you're doing in the one tier and the other tier, I think separating with different features makes a ton of sense, and the credit model can run both, right? So I think if you don't have solid packaging and you're just like good, better, besting, or you're just trying to say, hey, these features sound like advanced, so I'll put them over here, then you can get into a lot of friction. But that's more like a packaging issue. If you have good packaging, then credit models are not going to disturb that at all. They're actually just going to empower it. Maya asks, token usage and credits for AI products, almost cost-based pricing. How to do a pricing model in a way that customers get it and that you do not go broke for them loving the product. Yeah, so I'd say that the reason that credits are great is because they are bought up front, so you get the cash, and then customers get to sort of play around with the product, and they don't feel they lose if they don't use it. So it's like the risk is actually borne by you a little bit more than the customer, but you actually get the cash up front. So what I tend to do with AI products right now is that nobody knows, and I actually said this in the last webinar, I think last month, like nobody knows really how your AI product is used if it was based on a license model. Like if I just had to, like I just paid like my Netflix fee, $20 a month, and I just have unlimited usage of the thing, right? Then you incur all the token cost. And if somebody uses it like a lot, like a million times, then you're losing money. So no bueno. That's why we put in place the credit models and the usage-based models and so forth. But then that actually limits usage. So you have this catch-22 where you don't know what is blocking the adoption. Is it the pricing model or is it the product itself? So what I usually advise people to do is to say, hey, if you have a bunch of customers, like you have 100 customers, pick a few, like 3 or 5, and then as a sort of almost like closed beta, give them a license model. Like just give them unlimited usage for your AI product, even though it might cost, like you can always turn it off and go if it goes crazy, right? And say, hey, I made a mistake. But let them experience the product without having the sense that they need to pay every time they push a button or they do something, and then just see how it goes. And then you can use that to then say, hey, do I want to use that for all of my customers? Or do I just want to build a special pricing model around it, whatever it is? So you can have this experimentation mode across different pricing models with some of your customers, especially for AI, when you're not sure yet what actually is driving adoption of the product. That's how we usually do that. And then you can like significantly reduce the cost risk if something goes crazy because it's only a few customers. Marina says, it seems that the only pricing model used in mobile apps are monthly or yearly license payments. Do you think this will change in the future? I don't agree. Like I think Uber, for example, mobile app, totally usage-based, paid up front, right? So I pay for the trip, I buy it. Of course, a lot of license models are there. Like that's how apps started. But I think a lot of apps are basically pricing you on a ton of other things. Some of them are marketplaces, some of them are not. But I think you have all kinds of pricing models also inside mobile and also inside B2C. So I think the more advanced models are more predominant in B2B, but it's not an either or. Steve asks, do you have any thoughts on price models that generally work well for horizontal platforms? The biggest challenge is our customers get widely different amounts of value, and it's very hard to find a pricing metric that get anywhere close to scaling with the value delivered across so many unique customer types and use cases. You're spot on, Steve. So what you're experiencing is that you are a horizontal software, and that means that you are not supporting one value chain, you're supporting multiple value chains. So you're basically providing the input to a lot of different outputs, right? So you have a single tool that sits at the beginning of a lot of different value creation processes. And this is sort of the case with a lot of horizontal software, is that it's really, really hard to do outcome or value-based pricing in horizontal software, because horizontal basically means that you are at the input end of a lot of different value chains, right? So I think you have two options and maybe a hybrid in between the two. Like option one is just to embrace it. Just say, hey, we don't care. We're just going to be a really good input. We're just going to lower the price and we're just going to like go for it, right? Two is that you find the one avatar of vertical where you can provide a ton of value and just don't sell to anyone else. And then you stop being a horizontal software and you become a vertical software, right? And then the in-between version is that you say, hey, we are going to fence different types of verticals, and then we're going to just price that. So what do I mean by fencing? So Zoom pricing. Let's do that. See what we have here. See if we can actually get Zoom's pricing page to work. So if you see up here, right, plans and pricing. Zoom has individuals and businesses. They have enterprise, so that's basically sort of what they have. And then they have industries, right? And industries basically means that Zoom that has education, healthcare, developers. So this is sort of where Zoom has this issue where they're saying, hey, we are a horizontal software, like we just do meetings, but like developers and other types of organizations are getting more or less value out of us, and education doesn't have any money and healthcare is neither. So we want to price them lower than we want to price businesses. So this is Zoom's, this is why I call it a hybrid attempt to basically like get closer to value creation for some of these verticals that they're serving. And they use fencing to do that. So that's basically the trick. Is it elegant? No. Does it create a lot of different complexity in the model? Yes. Does it make you money? Sometimes, right? So those are the options you have. So Olivier says, how to make credit-based relevant. For example, if I sell a number of credit, people will make the math and calculate what's in it for me, and is that a bargain? Usually we see big number and we do not get the top, but what would be the best practice here? In addition, can we mix license and credit to the same account? For example, we can target occasional users with credit and regular users with license, right? Yeah. So it isn't a problem at all that people just calculate what they get for each credit. I think that's a feature, not a bug, right? So you should just say, hey, of course, like we do the calculation for you, right? So I think that's fine. What it really does is it says, hey, we want you to commit to using this, and we want the cash up front for providing the access to this thing. And then you basically get to spread your usage out over time. Then if I combine it with I usually don't necessarily combine it with a license model. You can, but I sometimes combine it with a pay-as-you-go model where you say, hey, you can subscribe to the credits and then it's whatever, $1 a credit, or you can buy the credits without a subscription, but then it's like $2 a credit. And then you decide if you want to be on a subscription for it or if you want to be on a pay-as-you-go model. So I think that would actually be like the combination credits and transactional. If it's either or is more usual than something else. All right. Last question. Edward says, big companies love flat prices. They have always have cost budgets. And I would say, no, they don't like flat prices. They like predictable prices. And there's a difference, right? So a flat price is not necessarily the same as the flat price is always predictable, but a predictable price isn't always flat, right? So you could basically say I have a license per user, and then they're super predictable, but it's not a flat price. So I think for enterprise, solve for predictability, not for flat. I know that we're at time. I appreciate the questions. I appreciate the attendance. I appreciate the community. So we have a bet going on how many people we can get to join the community. So, make me win. Go there, community.pricingsas.com, sign up. You can get it done before your next meeting. So go there and then also find the invitation for the next webinars and the next reports and find the full report. I only showed you like a teaser. So, so that's where it's all happening. Thank you so much for tuning in, guys.